cry when my dog runs away. I don't get angry at the bills I have to pay. I don't get angry when my mom smokes pot. It's the bottle and goes right through the rock. Fucking and fighting, it's all the same. Living with Louis Dog's the only way to stay sane. Let the loving come back to me. Go!
Okay guys, before I get started on the build video, I just wanted to go over a couple things because I noticed that a lot of new vapors are watching my videos and like trying these coils. If you're brand new to vaping, I would not recommend starting with these coils. Start with some standard stuff. It takes a little bit of practice to have a good understanding of what's going on before you start just jumping into these lower ohm builds. And batteries are really important. You don't know. I know for a lot of you that are watching this, this is old news and you're probably tired of hearing about it. But battery safety, you need high drain batteries. Samsung 25Rs, these are really readily available. I doubt they're counterfeited at this point, just because they have a lot of supply of them and they're not expensive. Sony VTC4s, VTC5s are good batteries. I think they're pretty heavily counterfeited now though, so I don't even buy them anymore. And then the EFES 35 amps, they don't perform really well below like 0.14 ohms, but I've never heard of one like catching on fire or exploding or anything, so they're okay battery too. But I've been using the Samsungs, I've been liking them a lot. Alright, so on this build was like the Caterpillar track coil was coined by Sean. He's Blue-Eyed Goon 83 on Instagram. He's one of the best builders out there.
That's what I'm talking about. Whenever I would watch one of these videos, they would always shout out another builder and tell you, Blue-Eyed Goon on Instagram. That's the shit I was talking about like a show ago or something.
There right now. He does really insane builds. He's extremely motivated, and he proved that this one was possible because it's basically a multi-strand fused Clapton that's been flattened with a hammer. And in the past, I've only been able to get like 3 strands of 26 gauge inside of a fused Clapton and have them actually line up. And so when I started seeing him doing these builds with like 10 strands and 12 strands of 32 gauge, I was like, how the heck are you doing that? And you'll see in the build video, but it's basically the main thing to get, I would say, is a jeweler's hammer, which is what he recommended me get, and that made all the difference in the world. I got it on eBay for like $10 for a jeweler's hammer, and that seems to make the biggest difference. But these coils are really nice, great vape, even with a single coil. This one, I made 2 coils in the video. One's a 1/8 inch inner diameter. The other one's a 3/32 inch. The 3/32 inch came out to 0.18 ohms for a single coil, and I'd recommend that guy for like a mechanical mod. The wick in there, just because it has a little bit lower resistance, cuts down on the ramp up time. And it's good vape. Really great flavor off of this coil, and it cools down the vapor a lot. A little bit of a different way than the fused Clapton does. Does it more with just the amount of surface area that's on the coil itself. And so with a 1/8 inch inner diameter, it can handle even a single coil, it's 165 watts, so it's 6.5 volts that it's firing at. It handles it really nicely. You can hear the sizzling at the end there, and that's not because it's not keeping up with wicking. That's because the wire itself, if you skip to the part of the video, like down in the timestamp down there, they have I have a section for cleaning the wire, and you'll see how water just runs across it. There's a lot of capillary channels inside and around the outside of the coil. So it keeps up with wicking even at stupid high wattages. It's still not a hot vape. So for a regulated box, I'd go with the 1/8 inch inner diameter. Just gives you more room to play with. And if you're doing a mechanical, 3/32 or like a 7/64 inch bit, they both work really well for the single coil that I'm making the video. I want to give a shout out to Local Vape, not just for sending me the shirt, but also we had the LV build off I was hosting on Instagram recently, and they donated like thousands of dollars worth of prizes, and it was probably the biggest turnout for a build off contest probably in the history of vaping. And they're a really cool company. People who run it are awesome, and it's a great company to support, so check out their website. And I think that's about it. Now let's go ahead and get started. I'll show some macro shots of these coils firing up, and then just get into the build video. Okay, so here's the coil from the build video. That's 30 gauge around the outside, with 10 strands of 30 gauge in parallel on the inside.
This is all 30 gauge. This build's all 30 gauge. That's good. So you only need 30 gauge. You don't even just need 30 gauge. You could do it with probably... I bet you could do it with 29. Might be a little harder. You could definitely do it with 32. Add a couple more cores. But 30 gauge is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use stainless steel instead of... I don't know what he's using. He may be using Canthal. I don't know if I have enough 30 gauge Canthal here. I got some. I don't think I have enough though. Hold on. Maybe I do. No. I have very little 30 gauge Canthal.
And that's firing at 5.5 volts, like 120 watts. It's a 0.26, 0.25 ohm coil. The reason I go with 30 gauge around the outside is because if you go with a thinner gauge, like 32 or smaller, it's more likely to break, for the wire to actually break when you're hammering it out. So that's why I went with this. It does have some pretty unique wicking properties, so I'll go ahead and put a little juice on here. Let it get cooled down real quick. There we go. And you can see the juice just run along that coil. It absorbs in like crazy evenly compared to other coils. So you have a really cool consistent smooth vapor production even at the higher wattages.
Just something to keep note, this is before like alien wires, micro Clapton builds. Cat Track was like, you know, one of the first like kind of intricate builds where you're using multi-cores inside of it. So it's got a bunch of cores in there. I think he said 10 strand. We'll see.
The other option for the coil, and it's what I'd recommend if you're using a mechanical mod or an unregulated device, just because it's going to have lower ohms with a 3/32 inch inner diameter, and it's going to decrease the ramp up time a little bit if you're using a mechanical mod. 0.18 ohms. And you can see why it's called the Caterpillar track coil. Caterpillar like the bulldozer, like tank tread, just because as it's flattened out like that, it definitely has that appearance. So this fires up quite a bit faster, right around the 4-volt range. And you can see in between the grooves in some of those Clapton portions, you can actually see through and see the wires all in parallel there. Yeah, I've been liking the coil. I like how it looks. Hope you enjoy the build video. Okay guys, we're going to need quite a few things for this build video. You're going to need a flat metallic surface. I'm using this that I picked up at a craft store. I had a coupon, which I'm glad because it was like 30 bucks. What I usually use is just like an anvil that's built into my vise, but for the purposes of this video I got this just so it'll be easier to get on camera. You also need a hammer. I'm using a jeweler's hammer. I think it might be called a chasing hammer. I'm not sure. I got it on eBay for like 10 bucks from Waymill, I believe the seller was. But these are nice because they're rounded and totally smooth, so they're less likely to mar your wire when you're flattening it. You're also going to need, well, an optional item, but it helps out a lot, is a torch. I just have a standard propane torch. Obviously be careful with these. You could easily burn the crap out of yourself or burn your house down accidentally, so careful with that. And if you have a torch, you're also going to need two sets of pliers, and I'll show you what that's for later. You're going to need some clippers, of course, and your standard stuff, like stuff to wrap the coil with. And also an atomizer with big post holes. This is a Mutation X, and actually the center post is big enough, but for good measure I drilled out those negative posts to 3/32 size. To get started, what I did was I grabbed some 30 gauge wire off the spool. I put one end into my vise. I pulled a whole big long length across the room and just tugged on it to straighten it out. And then I cut it into sections. And this is 10 pieces right here, which is what we're going to do for the build video. You just keep them as parallel as you can. They're going to overlap and stuff. That's okay. I just grab it tightly and give it a little bit of a twist just with my hand.
Okay. 10 pieces for the cores. What was I just going to get? One more thing. I think my torch is out of... I think my torch is out of butane. There you go. Okay, so I just gotta cut these. Let me cut these. I'll go over to chat while I do this. 10 pieces. It looks like he's got around like the 8-inch mark, something like that. Where's my chat? Where's my chat? Oh. Yeah, don't you just want to build now that you're watching Twisted Messes build? Okay. Keep losing my chat. There you go. Okay. So I'm gonna do this probably a little different. We've got the Twisted Messes mat and all. Look at that. I'm going to do this part a little differently. I don't do one big piece. I'm just going to take this and do it 10 times. I am pulling it straight. So I just need 10 of these. 5. That's 10. 10 pieces of 30 gauge out. Now, when I do this, I get these little bends at the end because of when I use my needle noses. So basically, I'm gonna take all of them, line them up, and cut off all the bends. So I just have straight wires. Then I got 10 strands of 30 gauge here, just like that. Okay, let's get back over to the video. Actually, he's twisting up his right now, so what I'm going to do, I might just twist it like he twists it. It's not always how I twist it, but I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do exactly what he's doing.
Hands here. It's going to give the drill chuck something to hold on to. And just try to get it into the center of the drill chuck as good as you can.
Okay.
And then tighten it down. I have another piece of 30 gauge that I prepared beforehand in the same exact way, just to straighten it out. I tied one end, I put one end in the vise and then pulled on the other end, and I got a real long length here. You probably won't need more than 6 to 8 feet of it to get this Claptoned up. And so just like any other Clapton, I'm going to stick this into the chuck of the drill. Any little place I can find, and hopefully get it to catch.
Slow down, Ken. Slow down! Hey! Fucker's moving fast. I ain't even done this part. Alright, so we said 6 to 8 feet of 30 gauge for the Clapton. So you don't leave it on the spool because the way you're Claptoning this, you can't put like too much tension on it or it's going to bind up them wires wrong. So I think arm length will work. So I just take an arm length, stretch it, and this should work for at least a single coil, I think. Should be around 6 feet now. And I can just put this either behind me or whatever. He's already got it in the drill. Alright. Oh, sorry, you can't see me. It's in the drill. Oh.
And at the beginning part, I just try to get it going. So if it overlaps and stuff, I just let it happen. And the difference between doing a normal Clapton and doing with this many strands, normally on a Clapton wire, I'll hold force on this core wire as I'm wrapping the Clapton around it. With this many strands, if you do that, it's just going to twist up completely. And we want these to stay as straight as possible. So to do that, you just kind of alter the direction or the way that you Clapton wire up, and just support the wire that's already been wrapped with your finger, and then leave these core wires straight. So just don't let them wrap up like after rubbing against your fingers. I'll kind of get it going and show you what I'm talking about.
Okay, you can see that. All right.
So you see how I'm holding support with my index finger back here against the base of this wire that's already been wrapped up. And I made a little mistake here already, so I'm going to pull it off. And using the same method, supporting that core wire that's already been wrapped to put pressure on. Try to straighten this out, and hopefully I can get it going again. Nope, I'm just going to leave that there and just try to move on. I'm going to leave the end loose for the macro shot so I can show you what this looks like. Okay, we got the wire here. You can see the beginning part where I had it in the chuck of the drill. And then as you go, you see the imperfection I decided to just forget about. We'll just clip it off from there. And underneath here, you can actually see those wires pretty much in parallel. And there's some minor twisting that happens.
I definitely do have a little bit of twisting as well. Should be good. We'll see. Definitely in the beginning. That 6 feet got me that 6 feet of wire got me a pretty long way. I got a pretty good amount out of that. It's definitely more than a single coil. Enough to like cut off any imperfections or whatever. I did go all the way to the end of the 6 foot. Alright.
But for the most part, by supporting that, the wire that's already been twisted or already been wrapped up with your finger, and then trying your best to avoid having any pressure on that core wire, all those core wires, is going to prevent it from twisting too much. Because as we hammer this out, it's going to actually straighten that wire. And it kind of untwists and gets straightened as you hammer it. So we'll go ahead and show you the end of the wire here. You can see for the most part those wires aren't really twisted up too extremely in there. I'll do my best to get this on video here. I'm just going to clip off that imperfection at the beginning. And I'll leave the end open like that so I can see where the wires are going when I hammer it. So all I do is it's going to be, you don't want to just smash this really hard.
This part's important. This part's very important how he does this. I want to make sure that, because I'm not able to see my camera, so I want to make sure that I have what I'm doing here. He doesn't even have a twist that messes build mat yet. Think about that. Think about that. Let me get my shit ready too. I'll let you. I guess we'll keep going with this. No. Hold on. He needs to hold up. You need to chill out. I'm gonna cut off the beginning like he did. I had a little bit of twisting there anyway. Alright. I got this going on. Hopefully you could see that. Okay. Get rid of the drill. I got this. Towel. And then he starts like where the wire is, where I end it, is where he's going to start, because then that'll fan out a little better than the rest. So I'm starting where I end it with the Claptoning, right at this stuff here, which is a smart little tip. It's good to get it flattened that way.
It's just like little controlled taps is the best way to do it. And like I noticed, just doing like up and down, you'll get like a lot of warping in the wire. And so what I've been doing is just kind of doing it at an angle like that as I hammer it. And regardless of what kind of hammer you're using, that seems to help quite a bit. Reduce the imperfections in the wire, and also keep it from twisting around too much. And as you go, you'll see the flattening taking place, and then you can tell as you go where the spots are that need a little bit more hammering, the ones that aren't quite as flat. And it just takes some patience. And I'll show you a macro shot of what this looks like right now. And
You're
then
not
we'll
done!
move on. Okay, so you can see the ends there. And surprisingly, it does a pretty good job of keeping those straight as you hammer it gradually in like that.
Man, he's fast. Shit. See, it starts to flatten them out. And in order for me to keep up with them, I'm going to have to keep hammering while he's doing this stuff. Just because of editing and stuff. These are a very fun wire to do.
So it kind of forces them down straight. And even if they do twist a little bit in there, just having that even amount of pressure of flattening it keeps them all aligned pretty well. And so right there you can see to the point of the wire that is not yet flattened. And you can see these uneven portions here too, where the wire kind of dips in a little bit, where it wasn't really flattened uniformly, and you can go back through and just keep hammering in those spots until it looks nice and straight, because you want it as straight as possible. And you just keep going. You can almost see the wire shifting as it gets to one of the portions that's a little bit twisted, and it'll flip around, and that's what's giving this wire that curve to it, which is fine because that's where the torch is going to come in, and we're going to straighten that back out after we're done flattening this out. And so the straighter you get those core wires at the beginning, and the less twist you put in it, the less of a curve you're going to have in your wire. Because as that wire untwists as you're hammering it, it puts that torque in the wire. And you can see this portion here is that part in the wire that didn't get twisted up barely at all while I was wrapping that Clapton on it. So the straighter you can keep those while you're Claptoning this, the more of a uniform result you're going to get at the end, and the less adjustment you'll have to do with the torch. Flip it over here. Let's get this end finished. And I just go back over it and kind of try to keep an eye on which parts need to be flattened more, and then just do real light taps until you have the result that you want. I've actually straightened it out a little bit, going back over it again, and now we're going to go ahead and torch this and straighten it out, and I'll show you the next portion. Okay, obviously it's
All right. Alright, so now this wire looks more like his, how it's curved like that. I need to get my 2 needle nose pliers out.
It's not a good idea to tape a blowtorch to your table, so don't do this. Usually I have this in an area that's not going to be near any sort of like structure that could burn or anything like that, and I wouldn't have my hands at this angle. I always have it pointing away from me in a way that's not going to burn me or catch anything in my house on fire. So make sure that if you do have a torch, hopefully it's one of those handheld butane torches.
It is.
Works just fine. Okay, so what you want to do is just grab the wire like 1 inch at a time and just start heating it up, and you can just kind of pull on it gently and then let it cool down while keeping it as straight as you can. And as it cools down, that hardens it up. Grab another portion. Don't want to get it too hot or the wire will melt. But just hot enough to where you can adjust that and try to get it a little straighter. You just move up the wire little by little until the whole thing is straightened out.
I'm trying to use less heat because it's stainless steel.
And be careful because this wire is going to stay hot for quite some time. So don't set it down on anything that's going to get burnt, and don't touch it with your hands. Same goes with those pliers. They're going to be extremely hot for a long time, so let them cool down somewhere where they're going to be safe, and then move on to the next portion. So here's what you should be basically looking at here, and this is a good time to check to make sure if that wire is going to fit through your post holes or not, and also just check for imperfections or unevenness in the wire, because if you have too drastic of an imperfection, it can cause a hot spot in the wire just where there's not a solid connection, or not a steady, like, consistent connection in the wire. And you'll notice like this side is pretty marred up. If I turn it over, it's going to be the side that I actually was using that chrome plated hammer on, and it gets it really shiny. And so I don't know, personally I like to put that shiny side to the outside so you can see it. But yeah, there's some more imperfections, and so I also like to go back over again after torching it straightened, and just hammer it one more time just to get all of the imperfections out, or get it as even as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again. It's not as even as I want it to be as far as how flat the wire is and how evenly it's flattened. I'll go back over it again after I torch it, just to get those last little imperfections out. Because not just for aesthetics, like it's going to look a lot nicer if it's even, but also because it's less likely to have hot spots internally in the wire, and it's just going to perform better the more even it is. So all I'm going to do is go back through and hammer this out, see if I can't get it more even, and then I'll show you some macro shots of that after torching it again. And I just continue that process. You don't want to do it too many times, because you're going to get the wire will become brittle if you do it too many times. but it's also a good time to check your posts, make sure that this wire is still going to fit through it, and it is. And I'm just going to make it basically as flat as I can, while still allowing it to fit through the posts. And when you're finished, and you got it to a point where you're satisfied with, this should be basically what you're looking at. And here's where you can really tell why Sean wanted to call it the Caterpillar track coil, because it really does look like tank tread tracks. You'll still see there are some imperfections left in this, but that's not a huge deal. When you wrap it up in a coil, it's going to look great. But the next thing that I always do after I get it to the point that I want it is to wash it off, just because there's going to be almost like a powder created from hammering the wire like that. And so there's going to be that powdery residue, and I like to wash that off before I start vaping it. So, and I have something I want to show you too while I'm washing it off, so I'll move us into over to the sink. I always like to rinse my wire off really well. I'll actually hit it with dish soap. Not everybody is comfortable using dish soap to clean their wire because they have to vape it afterwards. But as long as you rinse it off really, really well, I have never noticed any sort of flavor or weird taste from it. It's not guaranteed that there's not some sort of soapy chemical left on it, but I feel a little bit better. I think that does a better job of getting all of the possible metallic particles off of the wire. But you'll notice on this wire that it just runs off like that. It wicks in that way better than spiral wire, better than a zipper coil. I mean, there's not many wires that's going to act like that. And I think it's like a two-part process or reason. It's because that it creates capillary, like horizontal capillary channels for the water to continue flowing across. And then also internally, once you have the coil wrapped, you have all of those aligned smaller internal wires, creating juice channels as well. I'm not sure how much of the juice can actually get down inside of those internal wires, but I'm guessing it's probably a significant amount. So it's almost like a crisscross pattern, like a stainless steel mesh. So the wick itself has some pretty interesting wicking properties. But let's go ahead and wrap up the coil. Okay, so we got it cleaned up, and it's a good idea to keep the atomizer nearby while you're doing this, just to make sure you don't make too wide of a coil. I'm thinking 4 wraps is probably going to be as much as we're going to be able to fit in there. For this one, I'm using a larger diameter screwdriver than I normally use, just because we got 10 strands in there. It's going to be pretty low resistance. I'm going with 1/8 inch inner diameter here. For this size is 1/8 inch equivalent. So just like anything else, start wrapping the coil, and you're going to have to get the angle right as you go around here. And so just kind of pull it, once you get one wrap, pull it over kind of close so it's touching the other portion, and keep as much pressure on this wire as you can so you can get it nice and tight. See what we're looking at here. Yep, and that basically matches up for wraps there. Hopefully this portion is going to fit through. Posts. I think I can do it. Okay, I found the best way to do this is to mount this coil so that
We'll come back to this. So, I do suspect he hammered it more than in that video, which makes sense to just edit out some of the hammer, and there's no need to see all of this in a video.
Okay, I found the best way to do this is to mount this coil so that the wrap that comes up and around is going through the negative post, because in order to get this cleanly in there, you'll notice how these wires are kind of jetting out to the sides, and so the cleanest way to do this is to get it mounted in there and then give it an angle and kind of tilt it like that. And so having it tilted up like that, it's a lot easier to wick if we got this hole coming upwards, rather than trying to do this side pointed down, and then it cuts off the wick over there. So you're not able to wrap it back in and through the well, and that's why I'm doing that. Let's go ahead and get this guy in. I left the lead kind of long, just so I'd be able to get this guy through there. Fits right in, thankfully. And so I'm going to grab some pliers. And all I'm going to do is pull this through. On both sides. And once I have the center post, the coil at the center post, pretty close to the center post, what I do is I just go ahead and tighten that guy down first. And you definitely want to get this guy nice and tight. And then I kind of start adjusting this one upward. And then once I have it at the angle that I want, just check how much slack you have. I'm going to pull a little bit of that slack out by just tugging on the wire in the negative post. And then I'm going to tighten that down. And you just have to kind of eyeball it. Try your best to get the right amount of wire in here. Okay. And then at that point, it's just a matter of adjusting it. Clip this guy off. And this one. Bend that up and out of the way. And it's just like any other coil, where you just start firing it up. And then if you have a part like this top portion here that's not wanting to line up with you, with the other part of the coil, you can actually grab some pliers and basically force it into place. let's throw this on the IPv3 and see what it ohms out at. Alright, so it's ohming out right at 0.26 ohms for the single coil. I got it firing at 67 watts, right at 4.2, just under 4.2 volts. There's a little bit of ramp up time on this thing. So for a single coil, I'm going to actually try another one.
Point. Dead Rabbit V2 is what I got it in.
I'm gonna do it on a 3/32 drill bit just to see what it ohms out at, and then we'll know the ohms of this coil on two different sizes. This is the 1/8, came out to 0.25, 0.26 area, and then I'm gonna try it on a 3/32 inch, and we'll see where that goes. Okay, on the 3/32 drill bit size, we're looking at 0.19 ohms for a single coil. Which at 4.2 volts lights up quite a bit quicker. It's probably more my cup of tea for a single coil. But at the beginning you should have seen the performance for both of these. So that's the difference in size and looks is the 1/8 compared to the 3/32. So yeah, I mean, depending on what size drill bit you use, you could get different ohms coming out of this thing. If you're using a regulated device like IPv3 or Sigelli 150 watt, it's not going to matter really which size you go with, because you could just change the wattage up and down. But let me wick.
I'm going to put the link in the description to this video.
These guys up for you. For these 1/8 inch inner diameter coils, I like to use a lot of wick compared to what I normally would use, just because it's important to get full contact with that coil and the wick. And so it's always a struggle for me, because I usually do the 3/32 inch sizes. Right down and through. Grab it and pull it through. And try your best not to adjust that coil too much while you're pulling the wick through, just because if it gets pulled too intensely, what can happen is that those wires can get crossed and cause those hot spots to come back. Your wick's already in there, so you wouldn't really be able to tell, except that it's going to kind of hurt your throat when you're vaping. So sometimes if your coils lighten up evenly, and then after wicking it, when you're vaping it, it seems to be getting hot spots on the coil itself. It's usually caused just by when you're putting your wick in. It adjusted the coil and altered where it's positioned. The only thing here is just try to get some, like a pocket of air in there. I'm just going to snip this off a little bit more. You just want full airflow underneath and around the entire coil. Just get rid of some of that cotton, and there we go. So leave some space for air to travel in through and cool the whole coil down. around the entire coil. Let's get rid of some of that cotton, and there we go.
Whoa, what the fuck?
We'll leave some space for air to travel